healthcare system is broken, but it doesn't have to be. This is Revenue Cycle Optimized by Infinix Healthcare. We discuss the latest challenges in the revenue cycle space and provide actionable tips on how to overcome them at your organization.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode. I'm your host, Stuart Newsom, and we're excited to have with us today all of you that's going to speak to us today to talk about radiology practices and how you can overcome staffing shortages, as well as some revenue cycle challenges using automation as well as AI. Now, I'm really thrilled to have with us once again today as a guest, Stephanie Chang. She's our Senior Customer Success Manager here at Phoenix, and she has extensive experience working closely with radiology practices, helping them implement solutions to improve their revenue cycle. So Stephanie, again, just so glad to have you. How you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Oh, awesome, awesome. Always good to have you on board. You're just a wealth of knowledge, especially with a lot of the subject matter that we're going to discuss today. Now, we all know that managing a radiology practice is very demanding, especially when faced with some front-end staffing issues. There's also some process inefficiencies in the mix, perhaps things like missed coding opportunities that can lead to raising your denial rates. So today we're going to explore some practical ways to automate your workflows and ease the burden on your team without compromising the quality of patient care or revenue collection. So we'll take an in-depth look of how AI and automation can transform the radiology revenue cycle. So we're going to cover key topics such as automating patient access workflows, simplifying prior authorizations, and the end game is always about reducing denials. So by the end of the session, you should know how to elevate your RCM processes, or your game, if you will, boost those efficiencies that we were talking about earlier that were inefficient, and also improve your bottom line, which is always the end game goal as well. So with that, I'm going to dive right on in, Stephanie, and we'll start off with the first question I have for you is, can you start off by sharing some of the most common staffing and RCM challenges radiology practices are facing today?
Of course. So the past 3 years at Infinix, I've learned a wealth of knowledge in terms of working with radiology companies as well as orthopedic. But in the radiology practice, from what I learned, it can get very chaotic very quickly sometimes. And some of the most common staffing challenges that they do face are like short staff, like high turnover in terms of people leaving or out of office, right? People have their own lives and they have to be out of office sometimes. And also just all the manual admin work that kind of adds up and collects on itself as just time goes on. In terms of the RCM challenges that we do see in the radiology practices, in terms of denials, like you mentioned, right? They never really leave the world, the practical world. So denials and like the peer-to-peer, sometimes it's hard to work with those peer-to-peer because you're not really working directly with those ordering physicians. You're a referring facility. So then overall, I mean, that increases like write-offs and then overall denials if you don't have the right information. So altogether, most common staffing challenges, short staff, high turnover rate, not enough time of the day, and RCM challenges is surrounding denials.
Awesome, awesome. So yeah, I could agree with that. It's definitely, when you have such a short staff or shortage of staff, and then that high turnover, particularly on the front end with patient access, there's just a lot of demands when you're in that particular role. There's demands throughout the RCM, but if you don't have enough people to cover all the work to be done, especially manually, it can be very taxing on the process, leads to mistakes. We're all human, right? So we may overlook some things, may get in a routine to where it's just easy to write things off at the end of the day. So a lot of these things can actually build and snowball as it develops, and it can become a monumental issue
Of
at
course.
the end of the day. So with that said, I want to dive into basically how has AI as well as automation. And again, we can define what we mean by AI and automation. I mean, I think every episode we talk about AI and automation, we have to qualify, what that means, but just kind of address how that's helped staffing shortages in radiology practices, particularly when it comes to the front end operations like patient access.
Yeah, of course. So AI, right? That's something that's predictable. So like once it's learned a wealth of history of data, it starts to really understand what the patterns are. And what happens in the prior authorization world is that kind of learns and rule out those no auth required that some of your SMEs in the practice would know. So there's a lot of SMEs within each radiology business. They tend to know, for example, payer X CPT code Y, this combination usually doesn't need auth. And it's just knowledge, tribal knowledge, really.
Yep. Tribal knowledge. Yep.
Yeah. And AI will kind of replace that tribal knowledge that tends to sometimes like life happens, they have to be out of office or they have to be out for a longer time. AI is there to help you kind of benchmark those tribal knowledge that could have been. With that being said, the machine learning picks up on, the algorithm, understand what those no auth is, and then weaves those out so that your staff can really hone in on some of these authorization that needs some tend to and some caring to. So that removes the knowledge gaps. Overall, it also decreases the denials as well. So since your staff now has more time back in their hands to not have to deal with those NARs, they have more time to tend to those peer-to-peers. So for example, guideline changes some from time to time, not too often in the radiology world, but it can happen. And when those peer-to-peer spikes, your staff that isn't, you know, currently working on the auth workflow, picking up the phone and following them on a portal to see where the auth status is, they can then sync with the physicians and get that peer-to-peer resolved for you to get a better probability of getting authorization. So with that being said, that gives you more time in your hands with your SMEs to work on more sensitive things. And
Right. Exactly. Exactly. I've always said that automation's big help is always taking on those mundane and routine, processes that can, then you allow, the humans to go in and work those more serious cases like you had stated.
right.
So prior authorizations also can be a big bottleneck for radiology groups. We all know this. A lot of issues, with referring providers, rendering providers, who actually owns that prior auth. But how does automation streamline a lot of the processes that lead to faster approvals, particularly for radiology?
Yeah, of course. And some of the things that we just touched on in terms of just AI machine learning, right? And removing that manual part of work that the staff would have. So the bottleneck is you only have, for example, you only have so many people that's working in-house on the patient access world. And in radiology business, usually it's a front end people with that where they're servicing the front desk, they're servicing patient care as well as signature from the patient as well as servicing the in and out of where patients triage within that service as well. So that gives them the ability to kind of multitask, right? So the bottleneck is working with a automated streamline process is that we remove all of that data entry that you have to use, that the data comes from the EMR system to the payer, and then of course following up the statuses. All that manual work will be removed, and it plays a big part of giving back time in your resources hand to deal with those multitasking that you want to do. And also seasonal increases of volume of, radiology might be in place. So, like, for example, when school starts up again, there's an increase of injuries and there's an increase of imaging that could happen, right? Or toward the end of the year, where you have more people that is more easily going to radiology rather than beginning of the year because they have met their deductible, right? So
Mhm.
they're like, oh, I already met my deductible, so I might as well just get this checked out since I'm covered. So with those seasonal increase of volume, of course, streamlining your authorization process with automation, that doesn't affect your practice as a whole because you can set it and forget it. And
Mhm.
then you have your resources that can tend to some of those specialized cases that needs attendance.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. So yeah, I never, I have thought about the seasonal aspect of it, but it obviously does make sense that, when, there's this increase, and I'm sure many practices would obviously see and maybe track that increase. They would probably see it coming, right?
Yeah.
I'm assuming maybe I'm being a little rhetorical. Maybe I'm being a little more sarcastic, but they should, right? They should be able to see
Exactly.
those seasonal increases and then understand, wow, we gotta gear up for this. If they didn't have automation, oh, I mean, it's like they really have to gear up with their staff and their staff also, especially with the holidays and toward the end of the year, everybody wants to take that time off and go for, if that's also the case there.
Exactly. Yeah. So you want to make sure that if this is a repetitive work, automate it, and then so you can set it and forget it. Have your staff, work a more important task at hand, and as well as just it's reliable. Of course, there's some kinks here and there in terms of, integrations and how automation works, but those are more manageable, when those spike.
Awesome, awesome. So again, when we talk about AI and automation, it's kind of define that and what we mean by automation because you've mentioned, set it and forget it, let automation take over with those and mentioning the mundane and routine things. I want to expand on that a little bit, particularly in how it can reduce the denial rates. So the role that automation plays in that. So can you give us an example of how radiology practices have seen improvements in this area when they've implemented automation, talking about maybe some RPAs, what people would refer to as bots, etc.
Yeah, sure. There's definitely different types of automations as well. Direct automation with payers, right? Or third party portal automations as well, like AIM, Evacor, working with the company that can give you that automation and in that sense as well, RPA, moving data back and forth. Really, overall, automation helps eliminate that data back and forth and also triaging the data that eliminates the time spent on moving the data back and forth. So, with that being said, and how does it play a role in reducing denials? When you set yourself up for success in the front end, it definitely reflects in the back end, which is denials overall. But in terms of the front end, right, when we're moving these data back and forth, the auth is usually tend to be approved or no auth required, hopefully, because then we're able to triage and spend more time on those cases that might occur peer to peer or might be a denial or it might be a specific reason. So then someone can actually tend to those and then turn those around as auth approved for the procedure for the imaging before going in. And then, of course, that relieves a denial in the front end, as well as, you get an increase of clean claim in the back end as well. So that's where you'll see in terms of automation is removing that manual mundane work and then having a subject matter expertise to kind of turn either a peer-to-peer or deny case into approval and set yourself up for success there.
Awesome, awesome. So and then when I'm thinking through that, it's all about processes, it's all about workflow. Where does that all fit? Because everyone kind of has the way that they run their RCM. Everybody kind of has done it, through the years with some minor tweaks and adjustments, but it's always kind of been with human resources and manual labor. So when we're talking about AI and automation, you don't just throw it in there. So I would imagine from a workflow management perspective, that can be pretty challenging for some teams who are spread thin. Now do have to learn a new process. They have to understand something that they used to do, they're not doing anymore. So how can automation optimize those workflows, especially for practices, with limited in-house resources?
Yeah, of course. So having a centralized plugin, like for example, Infinix, right? So you have a centralized repository for a prior authorization. So an EMR system plugs into a system like Infinix and then plugs into the payer. We're able to automate the whole entire eligibility or prior authorization function in the radiology space. And with that being said, the data flows right back into your EMR system. All of the time and the resourcing power that usually goes into searching for different web payer portals and following up, like I said, to the final auth status, that will then be eliminated, and then your staff will really be able to kind of optimize their workflow in-house and what they could be doing and how they could be multitasking with some of these practices like that where, like I said, they're working front end, I mean front desk. They're triaging patient from one place to another. They could be dealing with a payer, particularly, for those pain point cases that needs more TLC. So with the automated workflow, you can rely on to make sure that things are at least flowing. You're getting the auth details or at least statuses and they're being triaged before your patient service. Again, like set it and forget it. You can already rely on this workflow. The only time that you really have to touch it is for those cases that needs more attention and talking with your patients and managing, the information with your doctors as well.
Nice, nice. So while we're on kind of those real world examples, so to speak, of,
Yeah.
of that, kind of looking at this from that perspective. So can you share a real world example where a radiology practice saw measurable improvements in revenue and even productivity? Because productivity adds to revenue. I think a lot of people look at revenue and they're just looking at their net patient revenue, their cash, their charges, but it's also the time your staff spends and how can you make that more efficient from an FTE standpoint. So after, so how has all that improved after adopting automated RCM solutions as a whole?
Of course. So we have a client out in Maryland that who works with us and we're integrated bi-directionally. So we receive the data from the EMR system, all the physicians that they work with as well. There's about 3 to 4 different locations that they do have, and all of their data gets sent over to Infinix, which is a centralized platform. And then we automate all the data into, third-party portal automations, automated, direct automations with payer, or as well as bots, like you said, RPA, in terms of managing the data back and forth. With that being said, like I said, set it and forget it. That's the workflow that you have, reliable workflow that you have for authorization. All the auth statuses, all the auth number, effective date will be back into your EMR system. So the staff is only living in one centralized portal for most of the time, which is their own risk system or EMR. So they don't have to leave anywhere because you can't imagine if you had like a Google account, Gmail account, and then a Windows email Outlook, different like emails or different work portals. Those are the time that's being eliminated. So your ROI is more resourcing power in your resources hand. That usually increase the resourcing power by 40% because you're not following up and doing the manual work, as well as increasing the resources happiness overall. Some of the times, like you mentioned, denials in the back end, they kind of come back in the front end and they ask, where was this authorization, right? Or
Mhm.
where was this information? So that also alleviates them from the pain point or the stress of the required information when this is automated, right? They can then, look back on where it is, the data can be documented here. So they'll be happier overall in terms of less responsibility and more time to multitask to really do what they want to do as well is the patient care, right? Caring for the patient that's in front of them. And as well as ROI in just having the in-house staff. So I have this client where, like I mentioned, so all this has been integrated. They haven't had to increase their staffs. They were just able to use just maintain the staff that they had coming in from plugging in this whole workflow and then able to scale with the volume as they increase their locations with someone like Infinix and keep the same SMEs that they have and keep them happy and not having to increase in-house resourcing power for this manual work. So a couple of things ROI is ROI and efficiency and resourcing power, ROI and not having to staff more in-house. And then 3 is just the time and the productivity that was increased by 40%.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, if you can have your existing staff, because you have this problem, right, of I have a staff shortage and you can't hire anyone. And if you did hire someone, you're probably hiring someone that's probably junior or entry level. Now you have to train them to come up to speed and to know that you have a staffing shortage, but then you're also expanding your business, expanding locations. To say that you didn't have to grow any more agents or SMEs to work those prior auths still maintain that growth and improve the processes and free up time, as you said, that's incredible. I don't know if you can really see that anywhere else in some of those scenarios. I think any practice administrator, CEO, CFO, director of RCM, director of patient access, you name it. Yeah, anyone would probably take that all day long, right?
Yeah. If their resources is happier, they're happier. If there's no increase of resourcing power needed as well, that's
Mhm.
time, that they have back in their hands, an ROI, direct ROI as well, when not hiring additionally. Yeah, everyone is happy. It's a win-win situation.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, that wraps up all the questions I have. So now we're going to turn it over to our audience for Q&A. And so, Stephanie, there is a couple questions that I see here, and one is great. I should have asked this in the beginning or somewhere in the session. But what are some of the practical first steps a radiology practice can take to start automating their revenue cycle? So that's a great question. It's like, basically, how do we get started?
Yeah, of course. I would say standardizing your auth data. Where is it coming in to your EMR system, or where is it stored? We want to make sure at least we have all the different workflows just touched on to make sure that we're all aligned on where the data is being pulled and where the data is being pulled back so that it's a centralized library. You want to make sure that everyone has, that's one. Two is like prepping resources, really understanding like what are their constraints. Usually time is their constraint, right? They don't have enough time in the day to really get through all that manual work. So what are their pain points? Is there a particular payer that they're, having trouble with that's really costing them a manual efforts in it? So like a lot of calling that needs to be done and not a calling to be followed up on. So that could be a pain point that could be easily alleviated when you're talking to a partner like us. And then, of course, what's the best for you? Is it to be integrated to really see the maximum value, or is it to really just have a centralized portal for you to capture this prior authorization process?
Awesome, awesome. Yes, all you just got to start sometimes, but you don't have to be so overwhelmed. Sometimes it can be overwhelming, especially when you hear those words, automating AI, how do you, and I think a lot of people have this experience whenever they have change. There's this tendency to kind of stay with status quo. It's just easier to stay status quo, even though if you see the water that's been given you to drink, you've been led to this, now drink, you just can't drink because it just seems overwhelming. And so breaking it down like that kind of makes it feel like, it's not so overwhelming. That's what you have to do. You just have to break it down step by step and have someone who's going to walk you through it more or less as a bench, if you will, to help you through that process. So that's excellent. We have another question here. How can radiology practices ensure they are still delivering personalized care while implementing automation in their patient access workflows? That's a great question. They have to still run their business, right? While you're doing automation. It's almost like you're living in the house while it's being renovated, so to speak.
Yeah, of course. And that actually, kind of sums up our call today, really, is that it gives you additional time and planning for your staff to really personalize the care that you want to give to your patient. So with automations and AI, this kind of helps remove some of those manual work. So when you're able to spend that more time to kind of design your patient care world, right? There could be those intricate things that you didn't have time to do while the patient's in front of you that you're able to do now because you have that time back. And then the automation just goes back to just set it and forget it. It's always in the back of your mind. At least you know it's working. There's going to be a green light. And of course, if not, then you have the time to really kind of make sure those are working. And of course, it sits so closely with the patient that really doesn't tweak the data that you give back to the patient since it's automated. So once you get the first status update from the payer with automation, you get that right back into you. So you should be able to feed that back into the patient and actually customize it more efficiently, more intuitively as well, instead of hearing anything from the patient.
Awesome, awesome. That's awesome. Great insights. Stephanie, can't thank you enough for joining us again and sharing, all of these valuable insights with us today. And I also want to thank everyone else who joined the session. So Stephanie, you'll be back. So thanks again for joining us.
Having me, yeah, it was nice talking to you, Stuart.
Awesome, awesome. And don't forget, everyone, if you have any additional questions, you can always reach out to us. We'll be happy to answer those questions for you. And check out some of the resources you can take advantage of and tools that help you with all of what we discussed today to help alleviate some of the operational burdens that you have in RCM and patient access. We're here to help. So be sure you contact us and we can tell you all about it. With that, we'll see you next week. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for joining us. Subscribe to get notified when our next episode is online. For more information for how we can help you increase reimbursements at your company, check out our website at infinix.com. That's INFINX.com.